You're welcome back to Sahara TV. This is the Africa edition. This is the segment where we look at news as it is reported by the local media from different countries across Africa. And to help me to do the looking into of the stories today, as usual, editor of Sahara Reporters, Declan, Galvin, to the far left, and next to him, SaharaTV anchor and the host of the Dr. Damaji show, Rudolf Okonkwo. My name is Kwesi, a son Baako. Today we'll be looking at 4 stories from 4 African countries. We'll be looking at a story from Kenya, Uganda, South Sudan, and Ghana. You're welcome to Africa Edition, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kwesi.
Okay, so let's start from Kenya. The Standard reports that former Assistant Minister Koigi Wawamwere made a statement to the effect that Kenya has matured democratically, but leaders have not. What's your reaction to that, Rudolf?
Oh, I like when he talked about the democratic space that he has expanded. And I think it's not just Kenya, it's across Africa. I think Kenya has set a good example in terms of dealing with crisis and gradually getting to a place where there's political maturity. But the fault lines are still there. You know, the fault lines you find in most African countries are still in Kenya. The issue of ethnicity, which he mentioned, is still an issue of concern in Kenya. They have not resolved it. They don't have a solution to it yet. You might have a situation now where there is peace, but I don't think that you can guarantee that in the next election they will get to the point where there's a consistency in terms of the gains of democracy. But I know when you look at the events in Kenya and how they deal with issues in Kenya, I think they are way advanced more than countries like Nigeria. But it doesn't mean that they have dealt with the demons that you'll find in African countries.
Yeah. What's your take, Declan?
So I think an important context is the Standard reached out to Wawamwere because of Saba Saba, which is July 7th. It's a really important day in Kenyan history because it marks pro-democracy demonstrations. And I know there's an image of Raila Odinga, who's the center right, and then some other important pro-democracy leaders. And what ended up taking place was 6,000 people rallied, and thousands were incarcerated by the Moi regime of Kenya. Many people were killed, and untold numbers were injured from confrontations between these protesters and the police. And so his comments are very important because Koigi Wawamwere is a very renowned activist in Kenya. I do take some issues with some of the things he said, however, to the Standard.
Like what?
You know, he was quoted that no one is arrested today for organizing or attending a public rally, and that's not entirely true. It's certainly, there's been really important improvements since 1990 during the Saba Saba moment. But there's a really important activist today in Kenya, Boniface Mwangi, and he's organized a number of different protests against behavior by parliamentarians. He's been arrested and beaten, and many people have been tear-gassed. And there's still a great deal of state-sponsored violence in the country, targeting people they perceive as political threats. And so those are concerns that I have.
Yeah, he also said that the leaders have become selfish and allow the ethnicity to destroy the country's social fabric. I'm thinking, you know, this is what has been going on since the beginning of the country. It's not just now that they've become selfish. You know, Moi didn't perform any better than Uhuru. You know, so. But we can give it to them that they're improving. I mean, they're one of the few countries that have survived without a military takeover of the country for more than 50 years. And anybody looking at Kenya will say they're dealing with issues of terrorism, which African countries are also dealing with. And they're doing better than most countries in terms of how they handle it. But the interesting thing is that next week, I think, Obama is going to Kenya. which will be a very interesting visit for the people in Kenya. The fact that they've expected this to happen before now, Obama did not go for some political reasons, both here and in Kenya. And the fact that Uhuru went to ICC and went there, and whichever way he did it, he was discharged from. So that is something that is different from what you see in other African countries. So Kenya, I think, is way ahead of others. Okay.
What sticks out for me, though, in that piece is that he mentioned that the systems have developed, but the politicians have not. Is this the reality?
I think it's, again, it was just a quote in a newspaper. I would want to know what he's specifically speaking about. Because a great deal of the bureaucracies and ministries are run by individuals, and I would actually say that the performance of those ministries is greatly dependent on the personalities leading them. For example, John Machuki, maybe it was about 8 to 10 years ago, he was the Interior Security Minister. He was very draconian and committed a number of human rights abuses. Whereas we find people in other ministries, including maybe finance or economics, they've had more technocratic leaders, people who were very knowledgeable of how to run an economy, monetary policy. And I would argue that Kenya has performed better in those areas. So it is very dependent on leaders. But I think his quote is too vague for me to be able to know exactly what I feel.
And it wasn't even long ago when Mwai was the president that you had the wife go into a newspaper office and slap people. So I don't think they've gone that far.
Well, maybe what he's really saying, though, is that those institutions have improved in way of their delivery of the service to the Kenyan people, but the people who head these institutions and some other ones who are like maybe mid-level staff are the ones who really need to change the game. But let's move on to the Saturday Monitor from Uganda. How police blocked arrested Besigye on campaign launch. So opposition leader Besigye was arrested by the police for reasons that I find very difficult to contend with. What's going on, Declan?
So this is, I think, this has been a really important week in Ugandan news. So MP Besigye is not the only important political opponent to Museveni who was arrested. So there was another, a former Prime Minister, Amana Mbabazi, was also arrested this week. And so we're actually looking at two really important high-profile arrests of people who are widely believed are going to be contenders for the president during Uganda's elections next year.
Yep.
That's the first important one. The reasons that they were arrested was because there has been laws put in place in Uganda where you're not allowed to have any kind of political assembly, particularly of opposition, in Uganda until a specified date. And so these individuals were going to go to rallies, and those rallies were deemed by the authorities as political rallies, and so they were arrested.
It's all very murky to me, Rudolf.
No, the big question is simple. What is Museveni still doing there? That's the African question that we have to ask. You were talking about Kenya, where there is progress, where people abide by the constitution, what the constitution says. Then you look at Uganda, where they changed the constitution so that one man will remain there for more than 26 years now, and he wants to continue. So that doesn't make sense. So you find progress at one end. And if you ask someone like Museveni, I've seen him talk, and he says things like, he's the only one that can keep the country together. He's the only one that can fix it. I mean, what if you die with the country?
Yep.
They're not setting up. You fail as a leader, and this is across Africa. If you can now groom people that will take over from you when the time comes for you to leave, which should be 8 years, no more than 8 years. If you can't do that, then
it's 10 years for some countries.
Okay, 8 or 10. You failed if you can't do that. So I don't understand why they continue to fight, because all this is about making sure that he continues to govern. If he's not going to run, he won't be interested in how people are meeting other people to campaign and make sure that they will be able to have a chance to contest.
The opposition leader, two of them were arrested, and I'm talking Besigye, Dr. Besigye here, seems very defiant. He actually has been arrested several times for practically the same thing, and he still keeps going. How effective is he as an opposition leader? What are his chances of nudging Museveni out of power?
I think that it's hard. I think it's hard to assess. First, even though there was a great deal of opposition to Museveni, even though a lot of that opposition doesn't necessarily manifest in ways that it would in other countries, there is still a lot of people who do support Museveni, and they see him as less corrupt than other leaders. But I think a lot of it is going to come down to how much opposition is allowed to organize. And this week has been clear signals that he's not going to tolerate any kind of challenge to his power. Part of this, and this is talked about a lot in Ugandan politics, is, okay, it's clear now that Museveni is going to run in 2016, but there are also concerns, and this is spawning some opposition, that he's grooming his son to take over the power. So he wants to create a Museveni dynasty. And this is creating some defections, or at least some conversation of defections within the national resistance movement of Uganda, which is Museveni's party.
On the international scale, I think part of the reason why Museveni is doing this is that there is a way that the international community, especially America and Britain, they ally themselves to Museveni, even though, and close their eyes to all these things going on, because they think that he's the best man they can work with to maintain peace in that part of Africa. Okay, if they signal to Museveni that he should leave, we won't have this going on. But if they continue to say that, like in Ethiopia, that's what's going on there. The man there is really not a kind of democratic person, leader that is needed there. But Boma is going there, and they feel that he's the best man because he's giving us space for them to do whatever they want to do. So that's also part of the dynamics.
Very vital point, Rudolf.
There's also another really important emerging issue that people have not been giving enough attention to in Uganda, and that's the discovery of oil in the north. And the fact that oil is in the north is really important because most of the civil wars in Uganda have been along the north, kind of the north-south demarcation. The most recent one, which Museveni successfully thwarted, was by the Acholi tribal communities and former generals from those communities essentially attempted to seize power through popular movements and through various coups. It's an important question how much the Acholi community in the north is going to really feel like they deserve the lion's share of oil revenue since it's on their land, and nobody's really speaking about this yet. Okay,
let's move to South Sudan. The South Sudanese paper, the Tribune, the Sudan Tribune, reports that Machar, that's the rebel leader, former vice president, and now the leader of the opposing forces, if you will, has asked President Salva Kiir to step down, calling him illegitimate. What's new? I mean, we've always heard that he's always on his case asking him to step down. What's different this time, Declan?
So what's important is, I believe the presidential term limits in, or the presidential term in South Sudan's 5 years. And in 2010 is when Salva Kiir was essentially inaugurated as president. And so this week was his 5th year. Even though it was South Sudan's 4th anniversary of independence, midnight on July 8th was supposedly going to be Salva Kiir's last day. But Parliament extended him a longer term because of they said that they can't organize effective elections in South Sudan because of the war.
Rudolf.
Yeah, I mean, South Sudan is one of these sad situations across Africa. But it's quite understandable. I mean, these people, they fought a war for more than 20-something years. I don't expect them to finish the war today and be able to organize any government, any sensible government. They don't know how to do that. They only know how to fight. And it will require time. I'm not saying that he should continue to stay in power or that they cannot have an election, but it's understandable why they may not be able to hold an election under this current condition. The issue is that the fact that they cannot come together and resolve that issue, and the international community could not even resolve it, and people are suffering and people are dying. You know, that's the sad part of it, because sometimes it's okay to go to Geneva and have conferences and meet. We forget about people who are suffering, who cannot find food to eat, and all these leaders are having meetings and conferences, and you know, so.
So I want us to look at it from this angle, though. So the war has been going on for quite a while. This definitely obstructs the normal democratic procedure that the country should follow. Now, Machar is asking Salva Kiir to step down and do what? Hand over to him, or what?
Well,
leave a vacuum?
No, but they could organize an election. You know, if he thinks that that's the solution, or form a unity government, find a way to show that you've ended something.
My understanding, Rudolf, is that there's been talks going on this subject, especially concerning elections, which hasn't resulted in much. Now, if you ask the man to leave, have you heard that he's, for instance, proposed any form of, you know, solution to fill that vacuum where Salva Kiir is not there, and I'm not sure he's proposing that they should hand over to him. So that's my concern.
The first thing is it depends on where the power structure is now, who is powerful, who is weak. So if the president is powerful and the international community feel that, you know, they have better option working with the president still in power, that's what they are going to back as a solution. But if they feel that the best option is to get a neutral person to take charge while they try to stabilize the country and have an election, they will do that. I don't know the dynamics on the ground, and that will be what will determine what they could do.
I think that the mindset of Riek Machar right now is essentially military overthrow. And so the other part, so he submitted this statement where he's saying from midnight on July 8th on, I'm going to say that your government is completely illegitimate. And then he said that there needs to be an overthrow of the government. And so I think that's where his mind is right now, is just military takeover. And that's not terribly surprising given his interests. So he's pretty much in the northern part of the country, and he essentially wants a stronghold there. There's a great deal of resources which he can control and enrich himself, and he's used to fighting in the bush anyway. So I think that this is essentially his psychology, and I think that's what's driving some of this.
How do you anticipate Salva Kiir reacting to this?
Well, Salva Kiir has made no motion that he was going to be leaving office anytime soon. Parliament, I believe it was a 3-year extension, and so I suspect that that's exactly what he's going to do. He's going to continue on as president for the foreseeable future. And I think the bigger question is, in terms of whether Salva Kiir continues to be president, has to do with how the war goes, and whether they're going to broker some agreement, or whether something far more deadly ends up resulting from this.
Rudolf?
Yeah, I think so. You know, the question is who is moving what piece, and where would that end in the next few months? If the opposition, if they move and they could take over the government, they will try to do that. You know, so, and then what's the international community doing? Do they have a grip on the situation, and could they get them, force them to have an agreement as quickly as possible? You know.
But Riek Machar's situation would be no different than Salva Kiir's situation is now. Let's say they push Salva Kiir further to the south and remove that government. Then Machar essentially still needs to govern the southern part of the country, whereas now Salva Kiir, with his group in government, has to figure out a way to govern the north. So the solution seems to be evasive in terms of how the entire country begin governed.
Very dicey situation over there. Let's look at our last story, Ghana. The NDC and the NPP, that's the National Democratic Congress and the New Patriotic Party, being the ruling party and the biggest opposition, are trading accusations of violence after a by-election in a certain part of Ghana, which on a regular day might not seem a very important constituency after all, but being as it's a by-election, and the seat belonged to the NDC and lost it to the NPP and wanted to grab it, that became a really big issue. What's your take, Rudolf?
See, you know, when I see stories from Ghana, I always look at mini Nigeria.
Lagos State.
Yeah, mini Nigeria. And the concern is that Ghana seems to be following the path of Nigeria. Especially the one that shocked me was the oil issue. Ghana, they discovered oil in Ghana, and soon after that, corruption increased. They don't have power. You know, it's like everything that was predicted is happening. So seeing this violence and the issue of two parties trying to blame each other for a minor political office election, you think about when the main election comes up, will this be a representation of what will happen across most of the country? So that is where it's of concern to anybody. We used to think that Ghana is progressive, it has done better, or is in a better situation than the big Nigeria, but it appears that it's basically following the Nigerian trend in retrogressive politics. So it's of concern to me, and I hope that the two parties are not carbon copy of APC and PDP in Nigeria.
You know, the interesting thing, though, is that the NDC also has the umbrella as its logo with the same colors.
Yeah.
Declan, your take?
I think one of the most interesting parts of this by-election is the politics of opposition, where what I believe the poll numbers were that if you take the two opposition groups and put their votes together, it actually surpasses the party which did win, which is the incumbent party, the NDC.
Yep.
So it's interesting that more people voted against the opposition, against the incumbent, than actually voted for them. And so I don't know how well that fares for the NDC in that area, or in the country where a lot of analysts have said that this by-election might be a litmus test or might be a window into what the elections next year will look like. And so I think it really raises an interesting question about opposition politics in Ghana.
Well, we spoke to Ben Efson, who's a pollster, a very well-respected pollster in Ghana, and he does not think that the Talensi by-election has any connection whatsoever with how the result is going to go, especially looking at the history behind this particular constituency. The seat belonged to the NDC, like I mentioned before. There was some kind of bickering within the party, and then they lost the seat to the NPP. Now there was some kind of unity after that, and they reclaimed that seat. Again, I don't quite connect with that issue about the two opposition parties summing up to be more than because the thing is that the political parties would vote for their own candidates anyhow. So if the PNC votes for their own and the NDC votes for their own, to me, it does not mean a rejection of the NDC in that area. Right. As a matter of fact, if you know Ghana politics, that area is a very strongly it's a very strong NDC stronghold. That's the ruling party. Unfortunately, we ran out of time and we have to end it here. Thank you very much, Declan and Rudolf.
Thank you.
And next week, we'll be back with more stories from across Africa. This has been Africa Edition. See you next week.